Greg, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So, Hara, you are a Customer Experience Strategist at AWS. It's a very interesting title. What does it mean exactly?
I work for an organization in AWS that creates assets, solutions, accelerators, offerings, and help our external organizations on how they can improve their customers' experiences, especially by using data analytics and machine learning.
Okay, so customers right now, they are interacting with different brands, and maybe the experience that they're having is suboptimal. So you're helping organizations use data and analytics to understand what those customers are feeling towards their brands and improving that?
That's part of it,
okay.
But the customer experience is across a customer life cycle.
Okay.
Think about a brand that you love, think about an organization that you interact with, and there is a journey that most probably you have been with that organization by first getting to know it, so we discovering it, maybe there is something about them that you are attracted to it, and then from that you can go and purchase something. Maybe you have a problem, you want to make a return. Also, how is the customer care? So all the different phases in your life cycle without a brand organization. So what I'm doing is helping organizations using data, using analytics and IML to support these organizations with their customer experiences. From getting to doing the first interaction, but also to become like a loyal customer with that organization.
Okay, yeah, so that makes sense, and it feels like if somebody were to embark on that journey, data becomes that much more important in building their amazing customer experience in the future. So I know that you work a lot with Greg's team as well. Greg, as somebody who leads data strategy at AWS, what does the collaboration look like between you and the customer experience team?
I mean, we work a lot across many different organizations that have a focus on creating compelling customer experiences. And as you just said, data is such a pivotal point towards creating really differentiating experiences for customers. So we interlock a lot. And the reason why it's also useful is because data is only one part of the equation. So like a lot of what is required to really purpose data in the right way to create those experiences requires a focus on what does that user interface look like? What does the journey look like for a customer as they engage with a brand through many different channels? And data is the bedrock beneath that, but it's the way that you choose to expose that in a nuanced way through the right channel is what creates the differentiating experience. And then importantly, as customers engage more with an organization, they generate a feedback loop of data as well, which requires and creates a richer spectrum of things to use and identify and leverage to continue to create further good experiences. So there's a flywheel between Hara and myself when we think about how we collaborate with organizations to create good customer experiences built on data.
So there's a data layer underlying all of these experiences and capturing how a customer is interacting with the brands that you guys are helping. But you also touched on something important, which is that there is a people aspect here of understanding what actually makes the customer experience pleasurable, right? And I want to expand on that a little bit because I really enjoyed reading your ebook, and you talked about building a modern data community. And that word community really stood out to me because it has a social feel to it, people-oriented feel to it. But there's the word data behind it. Can you unpack that for me? What's the interplay between the data part and the people part?
I can start.
Go for it.
So there are a couple of points there that are quite important. We look at data more than as we look at it as a product. We look at it's valuable, and how you share value across the teams within an organization, within the brand that you mentioned. This is the same concept for the data. You want to share across all the teams. But also, what you want to do is to share the knowledge. You want to share the work that these teams are doing, and you don't want to create bottlenecks. You don't want to duplicate work. So you want to minimize that fragmentation of working. So we need to see this more as we see this more as an asset, as a product that will be valuable for the organization, but also for the customers of that organization.
Okay, so there's a paradigm shift needed here about thinking about data as a product and not just something that is produced as a byproduct of our operations, right?
Yep.
So Greg, can you expand on a little bit on what does a data as a product paradigm actually mean?
Yeah, sure thing. And let's riff on the example of customer, because Hara is here from the customer experience area, right? So like, you know, all organizations will typically have some sort of customer data. And if you think about it, it lives everywhere, right? So many teams will generate those sets of customer data, whether you're sitting in marketing, if you're in a digital channel team, or if you're in a contact center, right? Those are some common places where customer data is generated. They'll all have different variations of how they have interacted with the customer, but they need to align to a common definition of what a product for customer data looks like. And so there might be a single-threaded team or person who's accountable for defining what does data for a customer look like minimally? What are the unique ways of identifying a customer? The key attributes, maybe that's some of their personal information and other attributes that are really key to the way you think about a customer in an organization. And so any team, whether I sit in marketing or in customer service, I can leverage that minimal common template for a customer data product, and I can populate it with my variants of customer data. But importantly, I can extend it. Because if I'm in digital, I can capture a unique ID and some of their attributes, but I also want to understand the digital footprint of that customer in the journey. And if I'm in customer service, I want to capture the customer sentiment around the conversations I've had. So all of these different parts of these organizations need a common way of thinking about customer as a data product, but the flexibility to extend it with the richness of how they engage with the customer. So that's a key piece to any data product, is simplicity in understanding the core of it, but extensibility in enriching it with further value. The reason why that's important is so that when that data is used throughout the organization, if I'm sitting in marketing, I can choose to just leverage just the marketing slice of that data product, or I can map it with the digital channel, the contact center version of that. And now I start to build up what's known as a C360. And I'm building a macro data product out of the individual pieces of it. And so when you think of any data as a product, it should be autonomous to use individually as a single item, but it should be interoperable. So you can connect it together with other data products to make it more valuable. And it comes back to what Hara was saying. You know, the reason why this is important is because you can deliver great customer experiences with that data for your own individual part of your organization, but you can also break down the silos. Customers don't just engage through an email. They walk into stores, they engage online. And so if I am engaging online, I want the brand to know what I did in store, how I engage with their email from marketing. And so they need that richness of a full data product to serve a full customer experience, if that makes sense.
I think it does. And if one organization were to actually adopt this paradigm, I think they could reap way more value than they are doing right now.
Right.
But I sense that there is an issue with the concept of a data product in terms of adoption, because a lot of organizations, they have a product team and they have product managers for the products that they sell, right? But treating data as a product, which is supposed to be something that maybe a central data team manages, maybe it's under IT, maybe it's under the CTO, how much change is required to actually take data, which you said, you know, permeates all parts of the organization, and organize it in the way that classically they think about managing a product, with a product manager, maybe with a scrum master, maybe with people who are responsible for cross-functional collaboration, project managers, milestones, SLAs. How do you make that kind of transformation at an organization?
I think it translates really well. There's lots of the things that you can think about any kind of like product-centric organization that you can apply to data. And a good place to begin, I mean, Hara, you and I have done a lot of work around like product-oriented data teams. Maybe you want to talk to like what that looks like in the data space.
Yes, exactly. And I was thinking, you are touching a big element of culture and people, to your previous question as well, right?
About the community.
Yeah, exactly. How you structure that, how you change a little bit the mindset of how the data product teams are established. So what we have here, we call the modern data community, right? And we have the producers and we have the consumers of the data. And we step away from the traditional central IT team, technology team that owns and distributes the data. So what we are thinking is that data is accessible to everybody. And here is the concept of the two-pizza team, as we love saying in AWS, comes in. So what is a two-pizza team? They are small, autonomous teams that have control of what they are doing in terms of delivering value back to the organizations that we talked before. They are specific roles, and we call them two pizza because they most probably can be fed by two pizzas.
Okay.
So they collaborate, they communicate more effectively.
Is there something special about having two pizza teams specifically? I mean, of course, it's a metaphor for having a small team, right? Why is that valuable when it comes to making this transition from treating data as just an organizational entity into an actual product?
First of all, there is a lot of accountability for the success of what these teams are working on, what are they are delivering.
Sure.
Also, there is, you minimize the dependencies. You minimize the dependencies on that central data or technology or platform team. And they are driven, but what is valuable to the organizations or the end customers. So they start with the priorities. They link whatever they are delivering back to value, back to business outcomes. As I said, they are autonomous, so and because they are small, it's easier to collaborate, to talk about the bottlenecks that they may have, the dependencies that they may have internally in this two pizza teams structure. And it's easier also to talk about feedback, to give feedback to each other, which is a very big thing
Right.
in our community, right?
Yeah, I'll add a thought to what Hara has said. The reason why having small autonomous two pizza data teams is a good thing for any organization now is because, simply put, there is so much data that's been generated by any organization, not only in volume, but in variety.
Yeah.
And there is so much increasing appetite for demand across the business, more so than ever now with generative AI, right? So that it's very hard to have a single team in an organization that is an expert in every thread of data across the organization, can go really deep, and can go really fast in serving that out to deliver value into a business organization. And so the answer to that is you need to break out that bottleneck by creating more autonomy and placing data closer to the business in smaller units that are independent, but are also interoperable. And so like teaming in small cross-functional ways is very important for that. But the other part of the equation we were just discussing is having good data as a product.
Right.
Right.
And think about the time that it takes, for example, when you have a priority, an opportunity or a challenge that this team needs to work on and deliver, the time that it used to take to get provide access to the data or get like the consumers of this data to get access and register, subscribe to the data, start using the data, ensure about the data quality. So all of these are not a bottleneck anymore. So these teams actually can focus on the value and get something very quickly on the hands of the users of whatever they are creating. This actually is very valuable because you can solve the value quickly, but also we can get feedback quickly and iterate.
Okay, that's a good point, that we need to reduce the friction of people having access to the right data, and as you said, Craig, keeping it closer to the domain where it's actually needed. But it seems to me like there still needs to be work done to actually avail the platform needed for these interactions to work. So is there a team that cuts across all of the data product teams that are responsible for managing the platform, the access control, the security, the access requests? I mean, what does that look like? Is it completely
100%.
decentralized, or is there some other?
There has to be a centralized entity that's focused on their customers, and their customers are the teams across the business that are either producing or consuming data. With many of the organizations we're working with that are moving towards these modern data community models, that team is essentially what was their data team, or is still their data team. But they have a different focus. They don't own the data. They're the conduit for that data across the organization. So they're focused on creating, to your point, the platforms and the tools that makes life super easy for anyone that's creating data to structure it in a good product way, categorize it with interesting tags that anyone in the business can understand, and make it available in a place. And on the other side of that equation, they're focused on all of those two pizza teams that might sit in marketing or finance or pricing or supply chain. And they are focused on creating a compelling experience for them to be able to search, discover, access that data, and innovate with it in the area of their business that they see fit. So very much a need to have a team that's focused on creating that platform and that infrastructure to create a good experience for producers and consumers. The other thing, which is a function of many of these teams, is building community.
Right.
Because when you have decentralization, there's always going to be some element of redundancy in work, but there will also be a need for people to think about best practice. Data scientists are always a good example here. You could have multiple data scientists embedded across teams in the business. You'd still want to have a community or a guild where they meet fortnightly, bi-weekly, to talk about common best practice around things like bias detection and understand where people are solving for certain modeling instances so that they're building cross capabilities and good communities. So that's the function of that core team. Build the technology, create the experience, create the community.
I think I'm starting to see how all of the pieces of this puzzle fit together. So before we'd have, let's say, the business and the tech teams, right? And the business, like you said, they have so much demand and the tech teams aren't able to fulfill it because just the demand has exploded. So what you're saying is that if we think of data as a product, what we do instead is the tech team is responsible for creating enablement for the rest of the teams.
Right.
And then you push out the actual understanding of the data, the access, the analysis of it, and building the right skills in the business domains. And each of them are organized in two pizza teams who are accountable to each other, who are moving fast, who are giving each other feedback, so that in this decentralized fashion, everybody can do their best work, reduce friction to accessing the data, and produce business insights quicker, while the tech team is still focusing on the tech.
Increase the surface area for innovation across the organization.
Okay.
Because if you look at where we were with many organizations 5 years ago, people would create innovation centers of excellence or incubation teams. That's not quick enough with the way the world is moving now. Innovation needs to be everybody's job, and data is tied to innovation. So you need to increase that surface area by making it available across the organization.
And if you think about customer experience, what we want as consumers of products and services, we're leading towards self-serve, right? So this is exactly the concept as well with the two pizza teams, right? And the modern data community, that the different teams within the organization can self-serve. And as Craig mentioned, like, you create that space for innovation, you create space for more training, you create space for learning, especially given, you know, the shortage of digital skills. So you enable, you create, you have energy, you have time actually to invest in these, which are very important.
I think the vision is compelling and it makes a lot of sense. Let's move a bit into the execution phase, right? Especially since, you know, on the ground, you're building that customer experience with the organizations that you work with, and Craig, you're helping them build out their data strategy. What are the barriers or friction points when we try to apply this with the organizations that you work with? Are the main bottlenecks to progress happening?
You can go first.
Can I just say, the phrase that I love saying, and we say that technology is not the difficult part.
Right.
We say that technology is not the challenge here. Actually, the culture, the mindset, it's all about a culture shift, a mindset shift, and especially thinking about the business priorities and the technology priorities. So this is the hardest work, right? So we need to bring this together. We need to understand what the organizations are trying to solve, what are the opportunities there, and how technology and business can come together. So I love saying that, because that's what we've been seeing with the customers, the organizations that we've been working with.
I fully agree, and I think so. Organization and culture, really critical, and we see this. So like, we work a lot with research and survey organizations like MIT and Wavestone, and they've seen, no surprises, that 99% of organizations have data as a priority. but only 24% are successful, as they would categorize themselves as being data-driven today. That hasn't changed in 5 years, by the way. And the main reason cited is culture and organization. So you're spot on with that point. I'll add some other pieces to this as well.
Yeah.
The other two criteria to bear in mind: modern data community, data as a product, is a great vision to strive to. You won't switch it on overnight.
Right.
This takes time, and there's a number of reasons for that, because one is it requires a different mindset, as you've been saying, in the business, and a different set of mature skills for the business to own their own data. You need to build that up over time. You need to build the right skills and give them the right tools, and you can't just do that as a binary switch. So the right way to go about thinking about that is to focus on where there are business priorities. At Amazon, we talk about working backwards a lot.
Exactly.
Start where there are priorities, work backwards to the right solution. That applies towards modern data community, because you want to start where there are teams that have appetite for change, that have a need to use data more. Begin with them, test out the model there, test out the technology there, learn and gather that feedback, and create a scale, a flywheel of scale from there, essentially.
So what you're saying is, basically, one of the biggest challenges is organizational change and culture.
Yep.
That's not a surprise. It's something that's faced across the board. And we all know there's no silver bullet really for such a situation. It's not an overnight change.
Yep.
It has to become gradual. So what you're saying is, let's start with the teams that have a business need for actually making that change, right? So, okay, assuming we do start with them, I can still see a situation where it's going to take time to get business buy-in, build the business case, estimate the ROI, and we've all experienced this kind of situation where they're excited, especially about AI or ML use cases, and then it kind of falls flat a little bit when it comes time to look at all of the prerequisites or the investment that they need to make. So how do they overcome that kind of step, right? How do they get past that and start kicking off the data flywheel?
Sure. And I think, we have a saying that we use a lot, which is, it's a think big vision.
Right.
But you need to start small to then scale fast. And a big part of that is thinking about how you deliver data work in a different way, thinking about minimal viable products that are high value but low effort, placed into teams where there is a need and a priority, which is a business priority, where you can iterate really quickly at low cost and low risk.
Right.
And so, for example, there might be, if I was a bank and I had a high priority to be able to understand and detect fraud more easily, that might be a high priority business requirement because the cost of fraud is high in the bank.
Yeah.
You could begin with serving out a particular fraud investigation team, with a better data product around customer and bad actors in the bank. And you'd use that to help to solve their business problem really quickly, which is detect and cut down the cost of fraud. At the same time, you're creating a first minimal customer data product focused maybe just on the fraudulent side of the equation. And you're trialing out which producers in the community need to provision that data. So if you like, it's a first slice of the wider vision. You're delivering that minimally in a place that adds value at low cost and low risk. You're engaging with the business as you do so. They're coming along that journey with you, and you're getting that feedback that Hara spoke about earlier to see, is this working for us even in this first iteration? Is our business ready to lean in so much to be autonomous, or do we need to support them more with training? Have we chosen the right technology? So taking that kind of approach of a think big vision but start small on a focused area, and taking a minimal viable product slice to then deliver something quick that you can then scale off the back of iteratively, is a way to approach the challenge of big business cases and getting stuck in analysis paralysis of planning, as well.
Yeah. And I will link this also back to priorities, because on what Craig was describing with that minimum viable product, you focus on what is the highest priority in terms of creating that products and services. What is the you prioritize the functionalities, the features that you like to go to in that first slice, and then you learn from this. And I love also saying you can fail fast. You can see what works, what doesn't work, and then you can back to that feedback loop. You can feed this into back, and then in the next iteration, the next slice of that flywheel, you can improve, you can add more functionality, more features, and you can learn from that first flywheel.
Yeah.
So I think from what you're saying here, there's two parts to making this successful. First, you have to think big in the sense that you have to find a priority. There's no way it's going to happen without it. And in a reasonable time frame, you could build a, let's say, directional business case. To your point about fraud in the bank, it's obvious the cost of fraud in the bank. They've already measured it, so you don't have to get into that analysis paralysis. The second part is being able to start small to cater to the execution capabilities of the current organization.
Yep.
I want to double click on something interesting that you said, which is that it has to be low cost and low risk, right? And I think risk is a big elephant in the room that needs to be addressed, because I think many of the organizations that we work with, they believe in the business case, they see the ROI that it's going to produce, but somehow there is still a perception that whatever is going to happen or whatever journey we need to embark on, it's still too risky, right? So how do we de-risk even more for those stakeholders that are on the fence? What is it that, what more can we do in designing a modern data community to make that work?
Yeah. So another concept we use a lot on Amazon is the concept of taking two-way door risks, right? So breaking down even a first obvious priority into initiatives that are going to be non-regrettable is essentially what we call a two-way door risk. In essence, you can come back from it.
Yeah.
We're working a lot right now, with customers that want to trial out new generative AI conversational chatbots.
Yeah.
And for them, exposing that directly to their external customer base is a one-way door risk, because they could risk reputational damage. A safe two-way door risk, which is a first step, is to test that internally.
Yeah.
Get the feedback, understand, refine the product, then expose it. So there's a way to look at any use case where you can take an approach of two-way door risks. Now, I'm going to contradict myself in this slightly, because I think we all need to be bold as well.
Yeah.
So you need to, especially when you're thinking about first use cases, when you're initiating a change journey, focus on priorities, de-risk them as much as you can, but make sure you're solving for what we sometimes call big rocks in the organization. And so an example of a big rock is governance, security, privacy. Make sure that you're choosing use cases that are testing out how you should do security at scale for data, how you should do governance at scale for data. Front load some of those bold things into the use case as well. You don't want to get to a point where you have watered down a use case so much that it actually just isn't meaningful enough anymore.
Right.
So there is a balance.
Too small somehow, and it doesn't feed into the think big vision.
Precisely. So there should be a kind of like anti-pattern to like don't think too big and then start too small, because you won't scale at all, maybe.
I don't really think that's a contradiction per se, Craig. I would say that maybe this goes back to the community piece. You need community leaders, those bold individuals who are ready to push the envelope and maybe shake things up in the organization, to maybe be the ones to sell the think big vision internally, and then be the ones to kick off the execution.
Right.
Yeah, and it goes back to your saying, like, you think big, you start small, but that start small is part of this think big idea, right? So you always have that think big idea at the back of your head. And if I may add to what Craig said, also I think also focus on controllable inputs. Isn't that right? To de-risk that MVPs, like not starting with the outcome first, but think how we can get started with these controllable inputs.
Yep, 100%. And I think that bleeds more into like also how you think about measuring success in your first use cases. And to your point, we tend in Amazon to focus more on those controllable inputs for the reason being that you can control them and they will generate the right output. So to give you an example, if I was in fashion retail and I wanted to maximize sale and I wanted to optimize like shopping basket so that I had more purchases in a single shopping occasion. Those are all great output metrics. I want to grow revenue, I want to maximize my shopping basket. The input metrics for that is I need to probably create more tailored personal recommendations to shoppers at the right price point. So in a data team, I can control those things because I can create models and I can create analytics that helps me to determine things like best next action, personalization, optimal price point. And if I focus on optimizing for those things, I'll drive my sales revenue. I'll have a better, share of wallet, share of shopping basket. So focus on the inputs rather than the outputs.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think the use cases that you mentioned are something that every retailer dreams about, right? Unless they've already rolled out these kinds of capabilities in the organization. But it requires a lot of teams to work together to actually make this work. So we talked about, the starting small and building the MVP. But what if we want to scale out the de-risking to the rest of the organization from a structural perspective? Going back to the original description of a data product and building a data community, how do we make it less risky across the whole organization so that, the 5 or 6 teams that we need to build a next best action model, a personalization model, we don't have to go through the pain every time of proving that it's not risky enough? How do we make low risk inherent in the new structure that we're trying to build with the organization?
It's a really good question. And I think, Hara mentioned this earlier around the concept of community.
Yeah.
So one is having better information sharing across organizations around what's working and how it's worked. But the second factor to that is those central teams that are building the platforms, that are building the tools, they are also there to share best practice as well. And so a common example on that might be, I'll go back to like data science and machine learning.
Yeah.
If you have multiple teams embedded in the business, you don't want them all solving for how to detect bias or model drift. Yeah. That's a centralized function that you can create and commoditize, so all of those teams can leverage it, and it's a best practice that they all leverage. And the nice thing with doing that is you then remove undifferentiated heavy lifting.
Yeah.
Those teams in the business no longer have to spend their efforts trying to figure out bias detection and model drift because it's available to them as a commoditized product.
Yeah.
They can focus on what's valuable, serving their customers.
If you think again about the structure of the more data community, we have the consumer and we have the producers. For the consumers, these 2 pizza teams, they will create these products, right? So to Craig's example of recommendation engine or next best action, when they create these products to serve for a particular use case, like a customer challenge, this eventually will become also a product that will go back to the producers. So you don't duplicate work. Like the consumers eventually will be the producers of the new products that new consumer teams can use.
Yeah, I agree.
So it's actually moving beyond point-to-point servicing of different departments in the same organization, abstracting that away into that data product so that anybody can use it in the organization.
We're truly thinking about an ecosystem of data here. And to come back to the points earlier, because data is not owned by anybody anymore, it's generated and used by everyone. And so we have to think differently as data practitioners. And many data teams have to change their mindset around, we don't own the data, we own the means to make data available.
So I think that makes sense if we're looking from a global org perspective, what's better for the organization as a whole. But the way organizations are organized now is that every department thinks about themselves, right, and their priorities and their deliverables.
Right.
So when it comes to something like this, especially around, for example, organizing budgets, who's going to pay for these use cases, even the MVP, especially if it's cutting across different teams? So how does that work?
You touched.
Do you want to go for it?
And especially since you've been re-engineering customer experiences with the organizations that you work with. So on the ground, when it comes time to fund the MVP and the use case 2 and 3 and 4, is there any change required from the budgeting perspective and how they think about organizing budgets?
I will link it back to what we discussed just before, that the priorities of the organization, and actually how the business teams from the organization and the technology teams work together. So if they align that on that first, that will be an easier conversation about the budget, right? We need to work as collectively for that first priority.
Agreed. I mean, to add to what you're saying, I think in the same way that we've just been discussing this entire time around decentralization in teams, financing on data work is taking a similar trajectory.
Right.
All right, moving away from centralized funding towards decentralizing. And a typical principle that I'm seeing for many organizations is that it doesn't need to be a one-size-fits-all rule for that.
Right.
So you can decentralize funding where there is differentiation. Because essentially, where there are teams working on differentiating things, it could be customer experience, it could be new products,
Yeah.
they need to move at a faster clip. And so they need to have more free rein to spend budget as they see fit. So unlock budget for those teams where they need to run faster, because they are parts of your organization where they are focused on differentiating what you do as a business. There will be other parts of the organization that are not moving as quickly because they're not in that differentiation seat.
Yeah.
Those might be areas like finance or HR, which are tended towards moving in a slower cycle. And for those areas, you can still have more centralized control as well. And those areas might also require more centralized control, especially in finance, where there's a need for audit and compliance.
Right.
So when you look at funding, there's definitely a move that we're seeing towards decentralization where there is differentiation.
And if you think also about the MVP slice, right? We talked before about delivering value very quickly. That will be an easier conversation as well when the business see the value out of that first MVP, coming out of that first MVP. So it will be easier to go to that second slice, the second iteration as well.
So when we're thinking about actual organizational change on the ground, what you're saying is that decentralization of funding is an important part, but it's never going to work from a big bang approach. You have to look at the faster movers in the organization, the ones that have, to your earlier point, the highest business value to gain out of creating data products, and maybe decentralizing funding for those particular initiatives, and still centralizing for others until it's time for them to catch up or realize the business value. So the transition towards that data product concept, towards these communities, is a spectrum.
I often say that organizations are spiky.
Right.
Because it's not, the world is not that simple where everyone can do the same thing at the same time.
Yeah.
But there is a natural or an organic alignment to everything you said. Where priorities exist, there is more of a justification for financing to be held decentralized. There's also more of a need to support them, and they probably will already be more mature. Because they've probably had to try and figure it out themselves. Because they've been in a world of pain trying to figure out what to use their data for. So there are some obvious signals around where to start when you think about anywhere in an organization. And they typically tend to also be the best places to evangelize and tell others how valuable this can be.
That's very important. You need these teams, you need this, and also organizations, right, within the industries that can evangelize for that.
Right, and to your point about the ones that are championing those MVPs and using it as a success story for the rest of the organization to believe that, and we talked about risk before, this isn't so risky, it's yielding the business value. We should try this in our department as well, for example. So if I'm a chief data officer, and I want to bring everything that you said today together, what would be the next 3 things that I need to do just to hit the ground running and action all of this and reach this vision of having data as a product in my organization?
What are your thoughts, Hara?
We talk about a lot of concepts today, right? We talk about the mindset and culture shift. We talk about the modern data community, about decentralizing the budget, starting with the MVP approach, and also thinking about data as a product. So these are all the topics. They're all the topics that they should think about. Start by thinking how you can structure your teams, like from the modern data community, like consumers, producers. What are your priorities? Think about the 2 pizza teams. Typically, they are the roles inside the organization that you can bring together to start thinking and working and delivering the first priorities. Bring together the business and technology teams. And that first MVP, by showing the value quickly, by delivering value quickly, you can achieve whatever we discussed so far.
Yeah, agreed. 1 or 2 other things I'd add is seek out and secure executive commitment for this, because this is a change effort that requires top-down driven sponsorship all the way from a CEO level, and more so than just a CEO giving it lip service. You really want to have someone who is walking that walk with you and showing that we think about data differently in this organization. We recognize everyone is accountable and everybody needs to up their game on how they do data. So top-down driven executive support, and aligned to that is identify that business stakeholder who will be your first sponsor
Yeah.
in a priority area, and ideally will put some skin in the game.
Yeah.
Right.
I love saying in the customer experience example, when you become an advocate, a loyal customer, you're an ambassador of that
Right.
brand or organization. You need to find that ambassador
Right,
within the organization.
Right.
Yeah.
Brand ambassadors,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
I think that if I were to summarize everything you're saying, so I'm a CDO, I look at the business priorities that we have, and then I go to a business stakeholder that is responsible for one of these priorities. I work with him or her to gain executive sponsorship for that top-down initiative. And in parallel, or maybe after, then I identify the two pizza teams and shape out the MVP with them so that we can execute on that priority use case in alignment with that business stakeholder.
Yeah.
Does
You got it.
that kind of
Yeah.
capture it? All right, awesome.
In a perfect world.
So, of course, I mean, we're being a bit simplistic here. We
Yeah.
know that, you guys do this day in, day out. It's not really simple to do. If somebody would want to unpack this and dive deeper into it, where can they find more of your work?
So we've recently, written an ebook around this topic. It goes deeper into all the topics we've discussed around modern data community. So that's a great read if you want to just dive a bit deeper around this as well.
The Modern Data Community ebook.
Yeah, correct. And we can provide the links for where that's available externally.
Sure.
If you want to go further still, we have executive briefing sessions where Hara, myself, and others from our teams can come together and talk more deeply about how customers, or organizations that we're working with are on this journey, and like how they're approaching this.
Hara, any other places people should go to?
We also have an ebook on omnichannel customer experience as well. And also there are innovation workshops, as we call them within our teams. One is called Data-Driven Everything. And we are doing exactly what you described. We work with organizations that they have a priority. I deep dive into this priority and we create that first slice, that first MVP, while thinking about the broader think big idea. And we can do that alongside thinking about the broader data strategy, also the customer experience challenges.
Awesome. So as a first port of call, they can, visit our external ebooks, the great work you guys have put together, and then once they have an idea of what they actually want to do and they want more of a high-touch engagement, then they can leverage the Data-Driven Everything program and maybe work with you for the customer experience re-engineering.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Hara, Craig, thank you so much for joining us today. I think I learned a ton. This was great information. I hope it'll help our viewers be able to embark on their data journey and make it a success and reduce that gap from 24% and hopefully...
We want to see that moving, right, in the right direction.
Hopefully move in the right direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.